Welcome to another episode of This Is Why Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 3, Episode 43, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. There is a Barry Sanders documentary out on Amazon Prime, and I was unaware, and now I am aware, and I watched it, and we're going to talk about it, dear listener. If you have not seen it yet, I would highly recommend that this is appointment television, that you watch it this very evening, Saturday, December 9th, the year of our Lord 2023. Do not be concerned, as there will be no spoiler alerts. In addition, we are going to have a thorough examination of the college football playoff in 2023 between our four finalists, Michigan, Alabama, Texas, and Washington. And finally, yes, reflections on Fargo Season 5, Episode 4. Brilliant, brilliant television. Thank you all to my loyal, my dear listeners. Please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5 stars. If you're new to the podcast, write a review, send to the peoples far and wide. If you like what you hear, This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1, the Barry Sanders documentary on Amazon Prime, and Remonstrations on Midlife Apathy.
As I'm sure is similar with your television programming, your wants, your likes, your desires, our new TVs, our modern technology, it starts to learn our preferences. So we can't hide, not only from one another, given how open we are, how honest we are on social media, we can't hide from our technology. Our technology knows us better than probably people in our lives. And that's because we admit everything to technology. I am no different. I have my preferences on the television set for the television programs, and then the television brings to me programs that I might be interested in and says, before you click on that app, before you click on that channel, hey, here's some programs that we think you'd like. And what was a program that came up on my television set this week? It was a documentary about one Barry Sanders. Yes, I have YouTube TV, and yes, I also have the YouTube app on my TV. And yes, I frequent, or at least I have frequented, videos on the YouTube about Barry Sanders. And here we have a documentary that, of course, because I'm last man to know, because I don't use the Twitter or the Instagram, I don't use these that much. I'm not getting news of some of the newer programming, the newer material that's coming out. There's a Barry Sanders documentary. I had no idea until my television is saying, do you want to watch it? Yes, television. Yes, I do want to watch it. As usual, we'll start from the beginning. The documentary is excellent. Barry Sanders, a relatively private person, has given full access to himself at least. He speaks rather openly and eloquently about his progression through his football career and what led up to his retirement and what he was thinking when he retired, in my mind still, way too early. But again, it's his life. It was his journey, and he decided to leave football behind when he decided to leave football behind. In retrospect, although I'm still disappointed that he left the stage so soon, I respect the fact that he was empowered to do so. In other words, he didn't feel compelled by what other people thought, namely that he was only, I think, 1,400 yards away from Walter Payton's all-time rushing record, that record and what people expected of him to be able to break that in the next season, it did not compel him to do something that he did not want to do. It did not compel him to stay on that stage for a moment longer than he wanted to, when in his heart he knew he was done. It was over for him. The documentary, as many of them do these days, doesn't go in a linear progression throughout the course of Barry's life. It begins with the 1989 draft, where he was the 3rd overall selection by the Detroit Lions, and it progresses back and forth throughout the course of his life, trying to build a model or build a paradigm that the viewer can then look through the lens of the world as Barry Sanders did and see that his retirement wasn't that odd or wasn't that unexpected for people that knew him, that understood him, And yet even those people were still disappointed and somewhat surprised that he elected to do what he did. I highly recommend that if you are a sports fan and are of my age, if you are anywhere between the age of 39 and 60, that you go out and watch it, because you had at least some recollection of Barry Sanders in his prime while he was playing. Even if you were younger, you knew of Barry Sanders. No one was unaware of Barry Sanders while he was playing. And then even 2 to 3 years after he retired, he was still in the public consciousness, particularly the NFL consciousness. I remember there being a number of rumors of him being traded to Miami. He was so great, and he left the stage while being so great, people clamored for more. It's rare that that happens in any endeavor in human existence, whether that's art, politics, religion, particularly sport. I'm not going to break down the documentary. I feel that that would be spoiling it. I'm not going to spoil it. I think it's such a good watch that even if you're not a sports fan, you could enjoy the journey as it's described, as it's depicted in the documentary. It involves his family. It involves his friends. The journey itself was amazing. You know, here's a guy who was not highly recruited and didn't start in his college of choice, Oklahoma State, until he was a junior, because the person in front of him was one Thurman Thomas, who ends up going to the Bills and being one of their all-time leading rushers, if not their all-time leading rusher, a Hall of Fame caliber back in his own right. So Barry has to wait in order to start. And in his junior year, he sets practically every NCAA rushing record that there is. And yes, the documentary shows highlights and touches on this. Again, well worth your time. Why am I bringing this all up? It brought me back to a place, and it brought out of me these feelings that I have not felt in 20 years. Sitting on my couch, watching this documentary, one that I was not anticipating. There was no level of expectation or excitement built up in me waiting for the documentary to come out. I had no idea that it was even being made, that it even existed. And I'm watching this documentary, and I am back in my chair. I'm a 22-year-old, and I am losing my mind watching in real time these runs that Barry's able to pull off. And there are a number of famous people in the documentary, fanboys, fangirls, all, that just gush over Barry and communicate, articulate the same type of vibration, of frequency. Every time Barry touched the ball, particularly if you were a Lions fan, you thought he could do something amazing. You thought he could score a touchdown. Didn't matter what the down and distance was, didn't matter what part of the field it was. It did not matter, in particular, how good the Lions were, what their record was, and it did not matter what type of or what team defense Barry was facing. Barry was so good that he would make the number 1 defense in the NFL or the number 31 defense in the NFL look foolish. Paid professionals, some of the people at the top of the game, look foolish. To relive those runs, to see the replays, and the way that it's laid out in the documentary, you have that childlike wonder that seems so lost on you as a 42-year-old or a 52-year-old or a 62-year-old. These emotions are a mix of hope and excitement and anticipation and expectation, a giddiness that you are witnessing, that you're experiencing greatness in real time. I'm not afraid to admit that that's been lost on me for a number of years, that sport in particular has not brought that out in me. Even with teams that I root for, that I have this long-standing allegiance to, it's just not there like it was when I was younger. The documentary reminded me of why we love sport in the first place, that it can make you feel that giddiness that you had when you were a child. There's a childlike wonder, a childlike curiosity as to what the possibilities are and what it feels like when those possibilities are realized. And then you get old and you're like, it's all the same old shit. It's all the same old shit. Where is the 21st century Barry Sanders? As anyone who watched Barry remembers, this is a guy who was so humble when he did something amazing, spectacular, otherworldly. Again, making professionals getting paid millions of dollars look like fools, look like children. Not worthy of being on the same field as Barry. He would take the ball and he would just hand it to the referee. He didn't have a pre-planned dance. He wasn't seeking out the right camera to get his face on television. He would just hand the ball to the referee and go back to the sideline. You rarely saw him in any kind of commercial. He wasn't trying to promote himself. It was his play that spoke for him. Even in the 90s, that was a breath of fresh air. It was unique given that, and I didn't remember this until I watched the documentary, that Barry Sanders and Deion Sanders were in the same draft. That the Neon Deion character that so changed the way we see the NFL, they were in the same draft. That was quite a contrast between what Barry did and what Deion did, both great in their own right. And instead of continuing to lament the fact that things have changed to the extent that they have, and that there's no more heroes out there that are worth rooting for, I instead started to look inside and consider the fact that there's no heroes out there because I'm not looking for one. I'm looking to be cynical. I'm looking to be old man, kick rocks, things have changed, I don't like it. Corbin Carroll, the baseball player, the Arizona Diamondbacks draftee that came up and shocked the baseball world, pretty modest kid. Almost this happy-go-lucky type of attitude, just glad to be in the position that he's in, performing as well as he is. He recently signed a 10-figure contract with the Arizona Diamondbacks and is still living with his roommate that he had, I believe, when he was at AAA, and he's still riding around on his bike. If you look for it, you'll find it. And yes, dear listeners, I'm now cognizant enough of the things that I am looking for to realize, are you being a negative prick? Or are you trying to see the good? Are you looking for things to reinforce some negativity? Or are you trying to be open to the consciousness that's there that has all of this positive? I remonstrate against the malaise that is turning 50 in the year of our Lord 2024 and feeling as if I've done all this before and it's not getting any better, it's just getting worse. I challenge you to do the same thing, dear listener, to conjure up, and I mean to use that word intentionally, conjure up feelings of what it was like to have that wonder, that giddiness, that joy, the expectancy of something great. Perhaps you don't see it around you, and perhaps that's because you don't feel the feelings. Can we go back? Can we actually remember those feelings and remember them such that they are our future? That we are remembering not our past, that we're remembering future events. I like to think that I'm a pretty original person. This is not an original concept. You hear this concept in a lot of this new metaphysical self-help, self-improvement. This is a Tony Robbins thing. This is a Dr. Joe Dispenza thing. Yet, if you look even to a book like the Bible, something that we would think does not contain these types of New Age metaphysical truths, really, what are we doing? We are conjuring up feelings of the good, and we are hopeful, we are faithful that our feelings will be matched by the external world. When you're young and you're full of piss and vinegar, all the possibilities seem open to you, seem possible to you. And when you get older, you feel like the four walls of life are coming in on you, are shrinking around you, and less do you feel that energy, the giddiness of possibility and how things will play out. Will watching the Barry Sanders documentary remind you of these types of feelings? Will you hearken back in your own childhood to remember what you felt brought possibility, what that giddiness felt like? Maybe, maybe not. If you're not a Lions fan, probably not. If you aren't that big a Barry fan, probably not. Even if you aren't, you'll still remember, man, he was a badass. That team was terrible, and he fought through some terrible, terrible circumstances and was still great and still made, without all the help that other people had in that league, still made grown men look like kids. Well, I want to be that kid again. Not the one that's standing on the field getting paid $1.5 million to make look like a fool while Barry runs right around me, although I'd probably take the $1.5 million right now and be made a fool of on national television, if that could mean for but a brief second. And yes, if you watch the documentary, you'll realize it was for but brief seconds. You could be in the presence of Barry Sanders during his greatness. It's the feeling, dear listener. It's the feeling. Harken back to those days where you felt possibility. You felt the giddiness of those possibilities becoming manifest and how it would all play out. It's very likely for all of us that these things that we have focused on, this negativity, it's obscured all of the opportunities, all of the positivity that was before us as well, and we just didn't see it. I'm not trying to be hyper spiritual or talk about the source or how metaphysics works, how you can manifest the things that you want in your life by having a certain vibration and chanting certain affirmations or mantras. It's a very simple trick that our brain plays on us. When we're focused on something, we notice these things in our external world. And if we're focused on negativity, we're obviously going to pick up on that pretty quickly. Whereas if there's positivity in front of us, we don't notice it. It's simply noticing. It's a very simple meditative principle. What are you noticing? When do you notice it? How do you feel when you're noticing it? If we can feel the feelings of giddiness, of expectation, of joy, of possibility, then we'll notice in our external environment opportunities that can bring about those feelings, and it doubles down. Those feelings are made manifest by what happens to us, what experiences we have in life. For those of you that know me, and that's practically everybody that listens to this podcast, particularly, and I think you all, my most faithful listeners, you remember what it was like to sit and watch a Detroit Lions game with me when Barry went off, when Barry made the adults look like kids, and the reaction that it brought forth in me, that it elicited in me. I want to continue to feel that way. I want to channel it, and I want to make sure that even in the direst, the darkest of times, and of course, many of those times are just products of your own imagination, our own imagination, the things that we expect, what we demand, or what we believe we should have, we should be experiencing, we should be doing. Let's go back to that giddiness. Let's go back to being 16 years old, or 20 years old, or 25 years old, with the curiosity and the joy and the wonder and the giddiness of how everything is going to manifest for our greatest good. But Patrick, many of you are saying now, the Detroit Lions completely sold out Barry and traded away most of their best talent because they were penny-pinching jackasses and wasted one of the greatest careers in football history. Yes, this is the truth. And that's another reason why I feel that watching the documentary would be so fruitful, regardless of whether or not you were a Detroit Lions fan, a Barry Sanders fan, or even a football fan. The outlook, the mentality of someone like Barry Sanders, someone so great that didn't get too high when things were good and didn't get too low when things were bad. Someone who had that balance, that confidence in knowing who they were and what they were about and what their goals were. Things may not work out the way that we want them to, and that doesn't mean that we were wrong to be curious, to be in bewilderment or wonder, to be giddy about what the future holds. It's about living life without regret and not having the things that you thought or you wished you could have done loom over you when you get to an age of 40, of 50, of 60. To be able to say, if things were different, they wouldn't have been the same, and I still have no regrets about the way things played out. For me, it all starts maintaining that feeling. And thank you to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Your tiny Jesus, your golden fleece diapers with your tiny little fat balled up fist.
Thank you so much for bringing to me this Barry Sanders documentary. Thank you so much for reinvigorating that spirit, that childlike wonder that I can hearken back to in the darkest of days. Namely, of course, when I hear electronic dance music.
Act 2, the 2023 College Football Playoff Preview.
Florida State got screwed. The eye test tells me that Washington is the best team. They've got the best quarterback. Alabama will probably end up winning it all. Son of a bitch.
Act 3, Reflections on Fargo Season 5, Episode 4.
Editor's note, I call Noah Hawley Noah Crawley once or twice during the segment, and I was just too lazy to edit it out and re-record it. There you go. Good television program is good. So many notes, so difficult to try to keep this to a reasonable 10, 15, even 20-minute segment. If you've listened to any of my episode breakdowns of any of the shows that I've watched, I don't like doing the blow by blow. I don't like going from scene to scene and providing my commentary on it. Though I have to start at the beginning of this episode, how spooky, how creepy, how genuinely horrifying it was, the way that it was shot, the sequencing, the fact that they had this slow motion at times with the mask that the characters were wearing, the eeriness of the music, of the way that it was all put together. Terror and horror alike, they're a part of the unknown. When you are insecure about the outcome, about what's going to transpire to reach an outcome, and it's less the events that are occurring than the anticipation that's built up to those events. You recognize very quickly when you're in the presence of a capable director, of a capable editor, when that tension that builds from the anticipation, that starts to bring forth that sense of fear, of dread, of anxiety, of horror. We are a desensitized population of people. There isn't a lot anymore that can surprise us, given that everything is now front and center, particularly on social media. Noah did a show called Legion. I call him Noah like I'm personally familiar with him, like we're friends. Noah did a show called Legion. It's actually a part of the Marvel Universe. And in that show, in the first season, he created this universe where, actually, you know what? I'm not going to give a spoiler alert here. I'm not going to spoil anything. Note to self, maybe edit this out. Maybe not. The show had this aura. It was both fantastic and had that supernatural element, and yet was also very grounded and had this element of terror, of horror to it that I can't remember seeing in a television program, particularly one that was part of a comic book universe. I immediately had this recollection of sitting in front of the TV where the lights were out. I was bought in, meaning that I was not in any way, shape, or form questioning the story, questioning the characters, questioning the music. I was lost in the story, as every director, every writer, every editor wants you to be in a movie or in a television show. I was lost in it, and I felt those sincere, those authentic feelings of fright, of dread. Those feelings came through me. They were elicited by the television program a number of times in the first season of Legion, and they were certainly elicited. They certainly came through me in the beginning sequence, that first even 8 to 10 minutes of programming in episode 4. And because we're here, because we're on the topic of these feelings coming through you genuinely, that they're authentically brought forth by what you're seeing on the television screen, let's talk about the scene where Roy Tillman presents at the trailer of the abusive spouse that we meet in the first episode, this guy who has beat on his wife, and in his twisted backward way, Roy has tried to counsel both of them towards a more harmonious marriage, we now see him sitting with a cup of coffee apart from this guy, counter to this guy, who has a posture that is reminiscent of the actor, of John Hamm in Mad Men. That casual, powerful look where you've got your arms sprawled along a piece of furniture, that this is your domain, that you are now in this alpha state. Here we have some spoiler alerts. If you haven't seen the episode yet, I highly suggest you stop here. The scene, the building of the tension between these two characters, and then its crescendo, the exchange of fire, what really came through me while watching this scene is how violent violence can be, how violent violence can be depicted on television and in movies. And I want to reflect on that very quickly. I routinely scoff at movies. I routinely scoff at television. I don't buy in. They're silly. And one of the things that most offends me is probably the right word, or I find most off-putting, is the way violence is sanitized in movies, in television. Violence is trivialized, it's cartoonish, it's even provided as comic relief and very often as humor. This can be artfully done, though it rarely is. And in this scene between the character Roy Tillman and this abusive spouse, you see what it is to have violence accurately depicted on a television screen. And it's quite disturbing. I felt disturbed watching it play out, which is, I believe, precisely what everyone on the television program was going for. Noah Crowley wanted us to feel disturbed in that moment vis-a-vis the violence. Not just the violent act itself and its consequences, but the character, Roy Tillman's reaction to that violence and to the consequence. In other words, his indifference, his callousness. So as much as I felt in the opening sequence, these feelings of fear and animus and dread, in this shooting scene, I felt repulsed. I felt disgusted. And I felt the powerlessness of the spouse, the surviving spouse, the woman who had been beaten, that she was between a rock and a hard place. Yes, she didn't like having to be physically confronted by her husband, yet she was still defensive of him because he is the father of her children. And now what does she have? An even more violent male authority figure in her life, one who just killed the man that she loved and implies that she could be next if she's not on the team. These scenes, at least to me, are unique in modern television. There isn't much out there that can elicit these types of feelings, that can build through the story, through the characters, that can build the type of suspense necessary to elicit these types of feelings. Writing, directing, editing, glorious, brilliant. And in a moment of comic relief, a strange twist, a strange turn of comic relief, you have the Ule character in the bathtub on his soliloquy, and it's one that I've heard many times, and I found it perfect, apropos for what we had just watched. Someone wielding all the power in the world, someone that without the responsibility of kingship was able to eat and drink and live like a king. You see the Ole character reminisce, then castigate the state of affairs that is everyone being able to live like a king. I'm sure you've heard it before in different social circles, whether or not it would be something as flat, as dry, as practical as a history lesson, or some of the more politically charged, some of the more socially charged commentary that one will spew out on the social medias. We today all live like kings. We don't have to worry about food, so we're not food insecure. Now, granted, there are people on planet Earth today that are food insecure. I am not diminishing or making light of that at all. if you look at the aggregate, the number of people on planet Earth that are food insecure today versus the people that were food insecure in, let's say, 1544, there surely is a hell of a lot more people who were food insecure in the year of our Lord 1544 than are food insecure today. Taking into account there's a hell of a lot more people now than there were then. And that goes for practically everything else. We are not shelter insecure. We are not violence insecure. We all live like kings. We can go to stores and buy food at the ready, whether meager or modest accommodations, all the way to royal palaces. There is shelter and it's available to us. And you know what? We can call on law enforcement, local, state, federal. We are, for the most part, secure from violence. And here you have this character who now I'm more and more believing, and again, things can change from episode to episode, I'm more and more believing that the scene that we saw where Ule, for all intents and purposes, right, he makes this Faustian bargain, he trades his soul for money so that he could buy food. He's speaking to the fact that one would be willing to do so because that's how low, that's how degraded a human being can get when they're starving to death. And that there is this level of consciousness that one has about their own life, about what it means to be alive when they experience these types of insecurities. To me, it being a reflection on his entering the home of Roy Tillman and painting that bizarre symbol on his children's wall. You don't know what it feels like to truly suffer through this insecurity. Let me instill it upon you. Let me teach you, someone who's felt it their entire life, a life that has been lived too long, an immortal life brought about to avoid that food insecurity. And look at the paradox even within the structure of that character. Here's a character that was starving to death and was willing to sell his soul in order to have enough money to just go and eat, and therefore condemning his earthly body to immortality, to always having to walk the earth in search of more of that money to continue to buy more of that food. Contrast this character's story arc with those you see in other mythology, vampires, werewolves. They're always wealthy because they've lived long enough. The mythos, the fictional universe in which they live, they are able to amass these fortunes. So they always live in this level of comfort. And here you have a character that appears to have achieved that same immortality by selling his soul for money to buy food and yet being stuck in that perpetual energy for eternity, constantly doing things for money in order to seek sustenance. And if you are like me, dear listener, you caught on at some point in that soliloquy that he wasn't simply talking to the camera, that someone was going to be present. Yes, I speculated, as you probably did, that it would be the old woman whose house that he, again, co-opted or he just moved into. And the terror in her face, in her experience, listening to this bizarre man who's broken into her house and taken it over. What does he want? What is the end goal here? Bringing it back to that Kafkaesque through line that I speculated might be present in every episode, or at least in most every episode. What does he want? Pancakes. He too wants to live like a king. He wants, at his beck and call, at his command, pancakes. Ooh, yeah, I got to get those vitamins and minerals. That was probably a terrible Fargo, a terrible Minnesota or North Dakota accent. Oh well. And this also reminds me of the fact that one of the antagonists of the original Fargo movie was also a pancake aficionado. The scene between Buscemi and I can't remember the actor's name. I should look that up. They're hungry. They want to go eat. What does he want? Pancakes.
Where is Pancake's house?
What?
We stop at Pancakes House.
What are you, nuts? We had pancakes for breakfast. Gotta go to a place where I can get a shot and a beer and steak, maybe. Not more fucking pancakes. Come on. Oh, come on, man.
I'm fucking hungry now, you know.
Yeah, Jesus. I'm saying we can stop, get pancakes, and then we'll get laid, all right?
It wasn't until that scene where Ule is asking for the pancakes that I remembered, wait a minute, the antagonist in the original Fargo movie was a pancake fanatic, and the entire pancake Kafka-esque through line is an homage to the original film. Nothing speaks to abundance, nothing speaks to excess, quite like the pancake. It's dessert for breakfast. I can go on and on about this episode. I thought it was brilliant. There's so many other things that I want to comment on. And yet here I am, almost at 35 minutes, and I haven't even done the intro. I haven't put in the music. There's a lot more to do. I'm going to wrap it up here again. I do want to note that I had speculated about the number of wives that Tillman had in the last episode, and it turns out, at least according to the exposition given to us by the FBI characters, that the number is 3, that Dot would be the middle wife. Therefore, we know that the first wife was Gator's mother, that Dot was the second wife, and the woman that he's with now, with the 2 daughters, that's his third wife. Although it did not dawn on the characters in the moment in the universe of Fargo, I thought that the head FBI agent's speech about what next was quite prescient. Yes, there are villains out there, and yes, you want to depose them. What happens next? Because in looking at those 5 steps ahead, you have to look at the very next step. What's the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step? And in the minds of these 2 FBI agents, it's clear they haven't even thought about the first step after the void that is Roy Tillman no longer being sheriff. I look forward to seeing how that plays out in the universe of the show and how these 2 characters, the FBI agents, their maturation process is impacted, is influenced by what happens after that void is created, the next step. Love the parallel of the storylines between the rich mother-in-law and the police officer, she being in debt, and it turns out that the mother-in-law's business, that her fortune is based in debt consolidation and debt collection. The juxtaposition of the interview between the mother-in-law and this reporter, and then a collection agent reaching out to the officer as the mother-in-law is justifying how she's helping the community, helping people in debt, not hurting them. Brilliant. Smart television show is smart. Gush I can for minutes on end. I love this Fargo universe in season 5. I love what they're doing. I'm excited about the next episode. I'm excited to revisit it with you, dear listeners. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.